All right. Welcome. My name is Blair McElroy. Thank you for coming to the International Communication Day panel discussion on optimizing your global success through study abroad. Like I said, my name is Blair. I serve as the Senior International Officer, managing the Office of Global Engagement at the University of Mississippi, and I'm also the Director of Study Abroad. These are both exciting roles and ones that I find great joy and accomplishment in. The panelists today will discuss the potential for success through study abroad. Data shows that students who study abroad get jobs sooner than their peers who do not study abroad. They also graduate earlier than those peers, and they make higher salaries upon entry into the workforce. Listing a study abroad experience on a resume shows a potential employer that an applicant has intercultural experience, intercultural communication skills, respect for coworkers, and flexibility. If you've ever tried to turn on the hot water in another country, you're flexible, I promise. So to the students in the room, at this point in your life, you're probably wondering what you'll be when you grow up. You may be questioning whether the major you chose is right for you. You may be setting goals for yourself through your 20s, 30s, and God forbid your 40s. You may be excited about moving to a new city or a new country, but also be a little nostalgic about leaving Oxford and Ole Miss. All of these worries and opportunities are valid and a part of your growth, and I can tell you right now not to worry. Pursuing goals and opportunities that you love will lead you to success. The key is finding what you love. Persevere and you'll find it. One indicator for success is being able to work respectfully and inclusively with other people. After you graduate and begin your career path, you will be working with people who are different than you. They may be from a different city or town. They will have a different upbringing. They will cook different comfort foods. They may have a different first language, and they may be from a completely different country than you. How do you effectively communicate and negotiate with people who aren't like you? What can you learn about people, cultures, religions, workplaces, languages that will diminish conflict and encourage respect and positive experiences throughout your life? As someone whose life and career has been shaped by studying abroad, I'm an advocate for global experiences for everyone, as these experiences lead to intercultural competence and intercultural communication skills. These outcomes are learned through exposure, and we're always growing and increasing our capacity for intercultural competence. Intercultural competence is the capability to shift perspective and adapt behavior to cultural differences and commonality. Intercultural competence reflects the degree to which cultural differences and commonalities in values, expectations, beliefs, and practices are effectively bridged. An inclusive environment is achieved, and specific differences that exist are addressed from a mutual adaptation perspective. All of us in the Office of Global Engagement have room to grow, and we serve international students, faculty, and staff every day, and we reflect with students who return from studying abroad on their experiences. This constant learning is a lifelong endeavor. Studying abroad is the perfect way to develop your intercultural competence and intercultural communication skills. Being inquisitive and reflective during your time abroad, asking why, is a key part of this growth. From learning why you can't take long showers in Jordan, why it's easy to be vegetarian in India, why American Southerners eat so much pork, to why collectivism is valued in certain cultures and patriotism and feminism mean different things around the world. The answers to these questions gives you perspective on where people you meet throughout your life might be coming from, be it personally or professionally. Studying abroad also allows you to reflect on why you do certain things, react in certain ways, and make choices based on your own culture and upbringing. Intercultural communication skills are often called soft skills. I disagree with this terminology. These are hard skills to learn, much less reflect upon and practice. I prefer to call these skills critical skills. They're critical for the human experience. What does it mean to be human, and a good one at that? Cultivating empathy and respect for everyone is the ultimate goal we strive to achieve in increasing our capacity for intercultural competence. for learning these critical human skills. These are the skills that will diminish conflict because you can put yourself in someone else's shoes, because you know they are coming from a different perspective. Maybe you don't yet know why, but you can ask and find out. You have the ability to think critically by reflecting on why you're perceiving a certain situation in a certain way, because you've also learned about yourself and your own biases and background through global exposure. This is the hallmark of a good employee, a good boss, and a good person. Having global experiences from studying abroad or engaging with different people and new activities locally is essential to cultivating an environment of respect. I believe that nurturing these critical human skills of valuing empathy and respect and developing our intercultural competence leads to world peace. Senator William Fulbright stated this much more eloquently when he said, "The rapprochement of peoples is only possible when differences of culture and outlook are respected and appreciated, rather than feared and condemned, when the common bond of human dignity is recognized as the essential bond for a peaceful world." He believed in the recognition of human dignity so much that he created the Fulbright program, which provides intercultural experiences across the world, and I encourage all of our faculty and students to become involved in the program. As we witness current events, some of the most captivating voices in the news and on the ground are those who recognize the backgrounds and the whys of those involved. While conflicts are complicated, there must also be an understanding of culture and a respect for the dignity of the innocents affected. We should also be cognizant of the conflicts, struggles, and humanitarian crises that happen every day but are less publicized. You can be part of the work in bringing global crises to an end through meaningful reflection, a constant search for knowledge, and an effort to develop intercultural competence, leading to the respect for the dignity of each person, to borrow a line from the University of Mississippi Creed. Even as we think about climate crisis and sustainable living, we are cultivating these skills. How do our choices affect others around the world? In Japan, you're charged if you need a plastic bag at 7-Eleven. And we see this movement happening across the US. Large chain grocers like Kroger and Walmart have pledged to eliminate plastic bags. Well, what if Oxford gas stations and restaurants did the same? Or you brought your own bags? Our small actions, like eliminating single-use plastic, can conserve our ocean life, which provides sustenance to people around the world. Small actions that affect our planet and asking why we do it shows your respect for the dignity of people you may never meet. I challenge everyone in this room to be inquisitive, reflective, respectful, and empathetic in all aspects of your lives. Strengthen those critical human skills that are learned through engagement with different cultures, and be thoughtful about your actions, big and small. For students, studying abroad during your time at the University of Mississippi is the perfect way to acquire these skills, and it should be required of every college student. For those of you who are already studying abroad here at the University of Mississippi, continue to grow and develop the intercultural competence and intercultural communication skills that you've learned by being a student in the American South. Let's all imagine a world where everyone nurtured their respect and empathy towards others. It would be an even more remarkable place. I would like to thank Dr. Zenaba Bieni, Associate Professor and Coordinator of International Programs in the School of Journalism and Media at the University of Mississippi, who led the International Education Week Planning Committee and invited so many wonderful speakers to come to our campus this week. Thank you to the IEW Planning Committee, with a special shout out to Rob Cook, whose efforts have resulted in a fantastic week-long program celebrating the benefits of international education and exchange worldwide. Check out our social media accounts, Ole Miss Abroad and Ole Miss International, for all of the events this week. So now I'd like to introduce our panelists. Dr. Ashleen Williams, Instructional Assistant Professor and Faculty Advisor of the First Gen Student Network at the University of Mississippi. Dr. Ian Gowan, Associate Director of the Croft Institute for International Studies and Instructional Associate Professor of Spanish at the University of Mississippi. Dr. Jason Cain, Interim Department Chair and Associate Professor of Integrated Marketing Communications at the University of Mississippi. Dr. Jeremy Cox, Consultant and Strategist in International Community and Economic Development. Professor Meskerem Tadesse, Professor of Business Administration at the University of the West in Rosemead, California. Dr. Timothy Nordstrom, Professor of Political Science at the University of Mississippi. Lauren Burns, Project Coordinator of the Arabic Language Flagship Program at the University of Mississippi. And our moderator, Dr. Graham Bodie, Interim Department Chair and Professor of Media and Communication at the University of Mississippi. Thank you.
Thank you, Blair. Thank you all for being here today. My role is to ask questions and then be quiet and allow our panelists to speak from their own experiences. I will say that there is a clear tie-in. I think Blair did a really good job of making that tie-in between our keynote speech this morning, which painted a beautifully horrific picture of the state of crisis that we find ourselves in, one of polarization and inability to hold conversations with people who disagree. It's too easy to unfriend or otherwise cut our Thanksgiving dinners short, which is in fact a phenomenon that we've seen since 2016, because we don't want to engage in the crucial conversations that might make us better humans. And yet you may have left that speech wondering, what do I do? And I think we have some intrapersonal things that we can do. We can work on ourselves. And one of the things that we can do as we work on ourselves as well as engage with others is study abroad. And so I think study abroad offers many kinds of opportunities, not the least of which is to allow us to fully engage in the kinds of debates and conversations that allow us to see the world in different ways and open ourselves to the possibility that we might not have all the answers to all of life's fundamental questions. Today we're blessed to have a diverse panel of experts who will share their experiences taking students abroad. And we're asking questions like, what are the different ways of gaining international experiences while still in school? How does student mobility help students develop global awareness? What are the opportunities and challenges of traveling abroad while in college? How can we get students excited about these opportunities? What are the opportunities and resources available to make these kinds of experiences happen? And how these individuals have seen study abroad enable the kinds of difficult conversations that we heard are so necessary from this morning. And so with that context, I want to open it up to each panelist as an initial kind of statement, if you will. So we'll just kind of go around the horn, starting here with Dr. Ashleen Williams. And that's just, so take 90 seconds. Very short amount of time before we get into our formal questions. What is it from your experience about study abroad that helps students view the world differently? I think it's already.
Okay. Can people hear me? Perfect. So when I was reflecting on this question, I was reflecting on the question of geography. And that's what I think that study abroad gives us. It gives us the freedom from our own physical geographies, right, which then shape our intellectual and cultural geographies, and allows us to take that proximity with other people, with other places, with other ideas, and with other cultures. And so when you are in proximity to other people, suddenly their lives, their values, their ideas become partially your own, and that's what I think study abroad gives us.
Is this one? Okay. So when I was thinking about this question, I think the thing that makes study abroad, helps students think about the world differently, is the fact that when you're studying abroad, you are constantly living outside of your comfort zone. So whenever you're living outside of your comfort zone, you're really, really hyper self-aware. You're thinking about everything that you say and do, but not only that, but how is everyone around me perceiving me? And so when you're constantly putting yourself under this microscope and thinking about everything that you do, your body language, the way you say things, the way that you dress, and thinking about how is my friend going to perceive me, or how is my classmates, my professors going to perceive that, and how does that reflect upon me, really makes us take a step back and opens up opportunities for thinking about different cultures. Why would my language partner or my roommate take what I said very differently than my friends or family in America?
actually have a very personal connection to this question. Back in the late 1980s, when I was a high schooler, I had an exchange student from Germany come to my high school. We became fast friends. And then a few years later, after he had gone back to West Germany, the Berlin Wall fell down. And after spending 4 hours on the phone with my friend, I got up the next morning and I changed my major to international relations. And that's precisely why I'm sitting here today. And it's that kind of personal experience, the kind of light bulb moment. I had gone from somebody who didn't know much about the world to somebody who had an incredible desire to learn about the world. And that's kind of why I get involved in study abroad, to give students the opportunity to have that moment.
Can you hear me? Well, I like the perspective you put in because you have a personal perspective. Like you have a personal perspective, but I will save it for a little bit. But I want to start a question to you. Who amongst you chose your parents to whom you were going to be born, what country you were going to be born, what you were going to look like? We all showed up. And yet, we're stuck with this unreasonable identity, almost a sickeningly strong identity that makes us feel we're different and somebody else must be not only different, less than or wrong as it is. So, and while I pass this thing, I just want you to reflect. I'm sure we're going to come back. Understand this. You, each of you, are a generation at a time. By knowing the world that you were left out because you weren't born elsewhere, to build on what our keynote speaker was talking about this morning, the kind of world that you want others to know about our country, our goodness, to go find out the greatness in the world and understand, we said we share one place, we share one globe. In the study abroad, this discussion I will come back to, that's the fascination, the excitement I see because you're at the age and the generation who is facing the worst and who can also change it by traveling and studying and knowing about other cultures and not just stuck where you were born by accident.
And for me, can you hear me all right? I'm representing the Croft Institute for International Studies and the Modern Languages program. I have to put a plug in for the development of language proficiency. Studying abroad is the most exciting way to learn a new language, right? So you can study in your classes, you can study your verbs in the past tense and the present tense, but living the experience, right? I remember my first study abroad experience in Mexico. I lived in a homestay environment. And every day I went home and had lunch or dinner with my family. And I immediately applied what I learned in class at the dinner table in a real life context. And that just made me extremely passionate about language. And again, I also would not be here if it weren't for study abroad experiences, which really brought language learning to life.
I would agree with all these perspectives. On a personal note, I sometimes feel that my world tends to shrink over time. It doesn't matter what I do. I've lived 20 years of my life overseas. I still travel overseas every year and engage overseas, but my world shrinks just by natural processes, I think. Maybe because of who I am, because of self-centeredness, but also because it's just tiring. I want to go the easiest route. I want to be around those people that agree with me, and I don't have to necessarily argue. I want to stretch myself. Study abroad is something that, yes, you've heard it said, probably hear it said again, it stretches you, but it is one of those things that probably needs to be part of an intentionality in all of our lives to get outside of that natural bubble that tends to form around us. And over time, you have to keep doing that. It's not something that comes naturally to most people, I don't think. It certainly didn't in my life. And so to fight against having that bubble, you need to create those opportunities and take advantage of those opportunities when we find them.
I traveled a pretty good bit when I was younger around the United States, but didn't actually have the opportunity to travel overseas until I was a graduate student in Florida. When one of the professors asked me if I'd like to go work in Italy that summer, and I said, why yes, I would like to go work in Italy this summer. And the next 4 summers I did that, traveling around, and I think that had a bigger impact on me than probably the coursework getting a Ph.D. And I was in my 30s when this happened. I'd always wanted to travel abroad. I just, you know, going through your 20s, trying to develop financial resources and whatnot to do that. But what impressed me was even going to Florence, Italy for my first place, which is a very American-friendly first stop to go internationally, was just how affecting it was for me at that age. And I came here thinking, if you can do that even earlier, in your 20s, how much it opens up the world and kind of reifies these places. Like there actually are people that live in these places you read about. They do the things you do. They do some things you don't do, but in general, they mostly do what you do. They just do it in a little bit different way. And I wanted to bring that experience here, and I also wanted to try to open a pathway for students like myself when I was an undergrad who couldn't so easily financially afford it. And still one of the most special things to me is when I had a student on a trip who's never even been on an airplane before, taking their first trip to go across the Atlantic somewhere. I love that. It's one of my favorite things I do, and I think it brings a lot of values to undergraduates and graduate students.
So we heard several personal stories on the panel, and I think that's a great entree into the fact that this panel is part of the 175th anniversary celebration of the founding of the University of Mississippi. If you didn't know, the theme is A Legacy of Calling. That's why our freshman read is the book that it is, and it's why several of the experiences we've seen over the semester have to do with calling. The website reads like this: for 175 years, our university has empowered students, faculty, staff, alumni, and other stakeholders to define and pursue their personal callings and lead lives of purpose. So Professor Tadesse, to you, in your bio, a very extensive bio, I might add if people haven't had a chance to look at it, you attribute your success in global business and multicultural environments to a deep appreciation of critical sociocultural and cross-border interdependence issues. It seems like you might feel a calling for this kind of work. Can you talk a little bit about this calling and how students might discover whether they might be called in a similar way?
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. I was very fortunate that a study abroad program took me from Ethiopia to the United States as a young high school student. Fortunately for me, the timing was not the years that you're living in. It was a healthy, a little bit more understanding and receptive globe. But yet still, I traveled as a young teenager from Ethiopia to a country in the United States, Clinton, Connecticut, to a high school, finished my high school, and lived with a family who have 3 blonde, blue-eyed daughters, and went to a high school where there were no other black kids. And fortunately, and I pray to God that each of you, after listening to the keynote speaker, challenge yourself to have that attitude. Call it naivete, but it doesn't matter. I went with an absolute open-eyed, starry-eyed excitement, adventure, positive curiosity, and I like you, you like me attitude. And I traveled, I lived with a family, I went to the high school every single day. To this day, my high school year remains to be some of the best times of my life. Not only it was great at the time, it allowed me to open up to all kinds of people, but it also marked the beginning of a great trajectory in my personal life and professional life. Whether I was working in Brussels or Mumbai, India, I feel I am a global citizen. I feel welcome and liked, and I like them. And it's like, life is like a mirror. You look in a mirror, you smile, your own face smiles back. You frown, your own face smiles back. Because I was fortunate to have a study abroad program, not short visit, not vacation, not shopping, but really to learn and to be amongst the family, eating foods that I never heard of, and sharing my culture and food and clothing that they never saw, and yet making something beautiful about it. And that began my career, my personal life. My friends are global, but especially in my professional life, it allowed me, you were talking about how you can prepare to market yourself to working for a job. Every interview, every human encounter, I took it as one more chance that I'm going to meet a different person, that I'm going to really love and they're going to love me. And that's because of my study abroad experience. And as I was reflecting the last couple of days preparing for this, why? And I genuinely give myself a little credit because I allowed it to be. I had no preconception. I wanted to be accepted, expected to be accepted. And that began by accepting. So study abroad or anything that you do in life, including in the classroom between teacher and student, it's a two-way relationship. People will accept you if you allow them, and the way you do is by accepting them. Study abroad opens your horizon. In professional world, I have had some careers that I would never have been able if I had walked in with coaching, no matter what your GPA. But because I would walk in and talk to the chairman of somebody's company who was doing in my final interview with such a happy attitude, and they would ask me, what makes sure this culture? Global is my last. Global environment, you talk about global marketing, global enterprise, global, and yet, we are not acting as if that global term matters. Global is very large, 7 billion people. We're stuck in the community we're in. We look in a mirror, look for people who look like us, think like us. Study abroad, not a week, not 1 year, in a little bit longer. Going willingly to learn, share your experience, not just take, but also give. To allow other people to learn and love your culture. I think that's the kind of thing study abroad can help us bridge and have a better world for you that you can walk into. And that would be in my life. I take every single day of my life to make sure that I change whoever is in front of me. By learning about me and by allowing them to tell me about them, and by honestly putting a positive landmark in every space, because I understand how to be foreigner. I understand how to be homesick. I also understand the beauty of where people accept you and you accept it in a broader, it opens up your horizon. You can go into a European assignment, you're not nervous, because I knew as a teenager, I walked into that home, I was okay. And so study abroad opens up and you are our hope for the world. But just think ahead, and I love what you said. Listen. Listen to understand. Cultural literacy is the greatest education anybody can have. What does that mean? Cultural understanding and respect for other people's cultures. And knowing that mine is no bigger, no smaller, but not less important, but not more important. If we do that, I think we'll have a better life for yourself, and we'll all retire in a happy world.
I love that, the fact that one of the reasons you were as successful in your experience was, first of all, coming into that experience, accepting and expecting to be accepted, respecting and expecting to be respected. And this was a few years ago. We won't say how many years ago. And we have another panelist, Ms. Burns, and we'll return to you with the most recent experience as a student in a study abroad program. And I'm curious if you agree with some of these personal benefits and the extent to which you have different kinds of personal benefits that you found most useful. And then what advice do you have for current students looking for ways to become more globally engaged based on your experience?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I agree with everything that's been said so far. For context, I graduated from the University of Mississippi. But after my experience, after I came back, I really realized how much I had changed as a person, really built up self-confidence. I became a very resilient person. I was able to accept challenges and deal with them in a much better way, I think, than before my study abroad experience. On a personal note, when I was living in Morocco, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, and it completely changed the trajectory of the rest of my life. I had only been there for 2 months, I had 10 months ahead of me, and I always think, like, I can't even imagine how my perspective would have been different if that had happened to me. If I had never studied abroad, but specifically if that had happened to me when I was here in America or here in the States, where I was at my absolute most comfortable. It completely changed my perspective on life, thinking about illness, disability, community, healthcare. Completely changed my perspective on all of those things. As for advice for you students who are looking to study abroad, and I really hope you do, I have 2 main things of advice. The first is try to find as many similarities as you can, thematic similarities. The differences are quite obvious when you go to a new country. And sometimes it can be harder to find those similarities, but if you can, it really can be the key to understanding this new culture. When I came back from Jordan studying abroad the first time when I was a student, of course, first question all my friends and family asked me is, how was it? What did you do? And it's almost an impossible question to answer. But I would always just chuckle and I would tell them, Jordan is like the Mississippi of the Middle East. And I would always get such a confused reaction because they're like, I can't think of 2 places that could be more different. But really, because I was there not as a tourist and going to all the touristy places, but living there day to day, I noticed so many similarities between my home state, Mississippi, and Jordan. The community, the slow pace of life. People really care about family, spending time with each other. It's the most important thing you can do. You know, your car breaks down on the side of the road, probably more than one stranger is gonna help you. Same thing in Jordan. You know, you'll talk to a stranger in the line at the grocery store. That's not really normal outside of the American South, but it was totally a normal thing in Jordan that I experienced every single day. So even though the differences were really obvious, once I found those familiarities and the similarities, it really helped me get my footing and kind of find my niche and find my place when I was studying abroad. And then the second piece of advice is kind of tags on to what I said earlier, is resist the urge to stay in your comfort zone. Obviously, you're completely out of your comfort zone. It's a whole new place, a whole new culture, probably a whole new language. So maybe after class, the last thing you want to do is just stay out. You just want to go home and you want to open up your laptop and watch Netflix all day long. And it is really tempting. And I know because I did it a few times, I'll admit to it. But there's just, you can do that at home, right? You have such an amazing opportunity in front of you. And even though it is really uncomfortable and sometimes it makes you nervous or anxious or upset, you have to put yourself out there. Making local friends, I think, is the absolute key thing to do. You can read every single travel book in the world about the specific country or the specific city that you're going to, and none of it can even hold a candle to making a local friend, because they're going to show you all these places you would have never heard about, and then they introduce you to their friends, and then those friends introduce you to their friends and their family, and you create, not just, these aren't people that you know, these become like your closest friends in your family. So find the similarities amongst all of the vast differences and resist the urge to want to stay comfortable.
So to the audience, as you're thinking about the questions you'll ask later and reflecting on what kind of personal experiences you might gather out of study abroad, it's interesting to me to have heard a few people talk about those benefits and their resilience, self-awareness, ability to see similarities. And I haven't heard a lot of, it's going to make me more competitive in the global marketplace. And yet that's the message that we often send. So Dr. Cox, this is kind of a follow-up to you. And I say that a little quippishly, not to diminish. Clearly that is an advantage of study abroad and an important advantage to be competitive in a global marketplace or develop the skills needed to succeed in an increasingly global workforce. So what are the skills, whether they're in this domain of kind of formal language about developing the skills, What are the competencies, attitudes? What are the competitive advantages that are afforded by study abroad from your perspective, having spent 20 years or more in that area?
Let me first, not to push back against terminology, but to change perhaps a little bit of the thinking. We use the term competitive advantage and competition a lot when we're talking about global marketplace, even business in general, even with the job market, right? Let me encourage you to think more in terms of what value do you bring? Because bringing value is not in competition to somebody else. We each have a unique value to bring. We're each created with that. And what is it that you bring to the table? You've heard some of the things here already that employers look for. It's an important piece. What are they after? Well, absolutely, resilience is a big one. Adaptability, so many different things like that. Even just coming back from visiting overseas or from living overseas for a time, it changes your thought process a lot. And I think the end goal here is, yes, I want to make it through. We hear about difficulties and okay, this is challenging. It's a new situation. I'm confused by this. I'm overwhelmed by this. Employers like to see people who go through that and come out the other side. It's that resilience, that adaptability. I would even throw out there the stick-to-itiveness. Everybody's heard of intelligence quotient, the IQ, right? Your intelligence, what you know, how you can apply that. It's an important part of the job market, right? Employers want to know, what do you have up here, and how do you apply that? That's key. Anybody ever heard of intelligence? Emotional intelligence? Okay, talked a lot about that, I assume. Big piece as well, right? What about the cultural intelligence piece? You've heard it described a lot here in different ways. Intelligence is important. Emotional intelligence, absolutely. More and more employers are looking toward that to find out how well do you know yourself and how well do you get along with other people. It's a chemistry piece there. But if you're able to bring intelligence and emotional intelligence, and you're able to bring a bit of cultural intelligence as well, meaning you understand that this is not just all there is. Understand other perspectives, other frameworks, other values, and even other worldviews. And you're able to bridge those. You're able to interact with others from different cultures. That's a huge advantage. Maybe let's just call it's a huge value add to employers. And so as you think about the opportunities for studying abroad, or even for engaging cross-culturally here in Oxford, there are a lot of different opportunities to do that. I want to ask you the question, how are you investing in your cultural intelligence? As you're going through university here, learning so much, interacting with different people, all these different things, look for those opportunities, including the opportunity to go overseas and to study abroad. Look for those opportunities to stretch yourself, to learn more about that, but also figure out where is my value add at the juncture of all three of these areas. And I think if you figure that out, and you start to really build up those three areas, wouldn't worry about being competitive in the job market.
Yeah, to that, please do push back. There are assumptions in every question, even if questions are supposed to be neutral. That's false. It's a false premise. I have assumptions in the questions I'm asking, and so if I'm asking the wrong question, I appreciate redirecting us or even reframing that question. And a lot of what you said again resonates. This notion of persistence, cultural intelligence, adaptability, resilience. And I really appreciate the notion of value add. What value am I bringing, and how study abroad is helping me to bring that particular value. And as a follow-up, Drs. Cain and Nordstrom, how can students tell whether a study abroad opportunity will help them cultivate these kinds of skills or the right skills? Clearly, there's a difference between, and we've heard people say, semester-long, 4 to 6 week summer program, year-long immersive program, finishing high school in a different country. There's all kinds of things that we might call study abroad experiences. So what information should students be collecting to make sure they're choosing the right opportunity for the kinds of value that they want to bring to themselves, to their development, to their cultural intelligence, to the job market, whatever the case might be. So we'll start with you, Dr. Nordstrom, and then Dr. Cain.
Well, I tend to agree with Blair when she called these not soft skills, but hard skills and critical skills. The things that I try to personally embed within my study abroad experience are maybe not some of the things that we've heard explicitly about so far, but really stressing opportunity and curiosity. Those might not seem like skills, but they're crucial to even having the mindset to go out and get these skills, right? The reason why I started in that 90-second opening with the personal story is because when I said I try to give students the opportunity to have that light bulb moment, what happened to me personally was it sparked curiosity about the world. And without that curiosity, I would have never had the drive to go to college and learn a second language, or to consider opportunities that I wouldn't have even looked for, actually, prior to that. So bringing the students in my class to Europe is doing, in part, spark that curiosity. But I think a lot of it has to do, in general, with the notion of what your goals are, right? So information is going to be important to the kinds of programs you have. There's a wide variety of opportunities, as we just heard, but a lot of what is going to resonate with you as part of a study abroad experience is what your goals are. Right? We've heard Dr. Gowan say a lot about language acquisition, Laura talking about language acquisition. That's definitely a big part of this, and having that capacity to speak a second language is very important. But listening, right? When you embed yourself in a place like Geneva or Vienna, which is where I take my students, you are listening to people from all over Europe. You're observing people from all over Europe. And I think that that's really important. We have a tendency to go through our day thinking about what's on our mind, what's next on our schedule. But I hope at least that my students understand that recognition of these different people and the different things that are going on around them in these contexts, that observation, listening is really important, and a skill that probably a lot of us could continue to develop even well into adulthood. So I think by putting students into a position where that is going to happen naturally, it doesn't have to be forced. Sure, I encourage some observation and listening into the kinds of things I ask my students to do. But I know that whether it's something as simple as eating lunch every day in the United Nations cafeteria, which we did, right? These are things, they're seeing this and they're living this and they're experiencing this firsthand. So I think those are actually the crucial things that I would link to. I'm sure you can get those in every different type of study abroad program, right? That's a set of information, right, that you can get about everything is how are you going to have these opportunities. But that's really what I would emphasize.
I've, over the years, gotten into the habit of reading Mark Twain when I travel on these trips. I think it's a way to deal with my own homesickness because I understand that language largely. But I was reading Americans Abroad last year, and I think the big quote from that one that you hear a lot is, to paraphrase, travel is the enemy of prejudice. But towards the end of the book, he also goes into how he thinks every American should travel abroad because it's so necessary to expand people's horizons, but he also kind of goes through how lucky he was to be a part of a party that got to linger in the locations. And I thought it was funny that even in the 1870s, he was noting the American habit of, you'd see Americans abroad going and just doing the equivalent of taking a selfie next to all the high points and then moving along and never really saving the location. So that has been a very long habit that we have as traveling. I'm going to imagine most people who travel generally kind of do that. But I think the value to study abroad and like evaluating your study abroad is that lingering experience that he describes. It's a very different thing from doing a high school senior trip where you hit all the high points, take a picture and move on, versus living in a neighborhood for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 10 months. The way that you meet people, the way that you're going to start picking up language, because you'll eventually just get too frustrated not to start picking up the language, and humans just kind of do that. You start learning food, you start learning how to go to the grocery store because it gets expensive to eat out all the time, and there's all this additive thing that comes along with just being in a place in over an extended period of time that goes so far above the actual coursework that you're doing there. The coursework often, at least in our program, reflects what we're doing, but it's kind of to accentuate those experiences and encourage students to have those experiences in the big end. So I think if I was to suggest to a student how to evaluate a program, it's transferring classes back is always important, but what do you have the budget to do? What's going to apply to your degree, and how long can you be in a place to get all those things? Because I think the greatest value is having to be there. We keep talking about resiliency, and I think that's a huge one. It's funny, your story, I have to make myself go out occasionally because I start getting burnt out. And I'm like, no, you got to go out and do this. And that's such a big part of this experience too, that you just get out of this. I've been to most of the places that we go multiple times at this point, so part of my fun is just taking a new group of students and watching y'all figure it out one more time, because I make you. I encourage my faculty to only help when it's serious. If it's, problem solve yourself. That's what you're learning over here. So in my evaluations, that's really what I would encourage you to do, is where's somewhere that you think you can melt in, and where's somewhere that you can be, and what is a package that's going to be put together to accentuate that and build on that experience, to sort of force you, because we all tend to, leisure time, and we'll get off on things that are maybe not that culturally relevant. So a good package with coursework and things like that is also a way to make sure that you do the things there that you can only do there, rather than just going and doing something abroad that you could do over here as well. So that's kind of how I would evaluate things, I think.
Yeah, so staying on this topic, Drs. Williams and Gowan, as you think about the questions students are asking, the types of experiences that they either need or express that they want as they matriculate through their academic program, what's your advice for those of us to advise students when it comes to study abroad? So students that come and say, I've been thinking about going abroad, and so I said, well, why? He's like, I don't know, because my mom told me I had to, or whatever, right? So this can be about the kinds of opportunities. This could be about the ways in which they might fund those opportunities. That might be when they should be thinking of taking advantage of those opportunities. Any of those sorts of things. What should academic advisors, faculty, and others of us that meet with students, what should we keep in mind as we point students towards study abroad opportunities?
Sure, yeah. So if you go to the website, Ole Miss Study Abroad, and you kind of select any country, for example, Spain, you might find 100 different programs that this university supports, right? And I think that may be true at other universities as well, but I think kind of what sets us apart here at the University of Mississippi is that about 20% of those programs are what's called direct exchange programs, which is a really unique opportunity, and also the most affordable option that you have as students here at the University of Mississippi. So basically what these direct exchange programs, the way they work is, let's say you want to go to Mainz, Germany, right? We have a partnership there with the university, so you pay tuition at the University of Mississippi, right? And then you study in Germany that semester. At the same time, that university in Germany, they'll take a student who will pay tuition at their local university and come here to the University of Mississippi. So when you enroll in one of these direct exchange programs, obviously the financial benefit is clear, right? But the other advantage is being direct exchange, essentially you go and you have free reign at their curriculum, right? So students who recently came back from a program in Bilbao, Spain, can take courses, political science, they can take courses in history, they can take courses in international studies, law, right? And they can take those classes sometimes in English, but also for the really serious language students, they can take those classes in the target language. So they can take those classes in Spanish in Spain, they can take those classes in German in Germany, which is we talked about going outside your comfort zone. That's definitely going outside your comfort zone. That's an enormous challenge for even the best language students, right? But there's so much to gain, right? Completely different. If I'm to go to Spain and take a class on advanced grammar, like I would here in the US, which is an option, right? That those classes do exist, and Spanish is a second language. But it's completely different if I'm going to go and enroll in a class of, political science with someone like Dr. Nordstrom from Spain, teaching in Spanish, all students from the local country. And I know personally, that was the greatest experience that I ever had from study abroad, sitting in the classroom with local students. And honestly, I can't remember a whole lot that the professor taught me in the class. But I was forced to sit next to 2-3 other students, local students from the country. And I remember on the very first day, one of the students sitting next to me said, "Hey, this weekend, we're going to my hometown to visit my family. Do you want to come along?" And I said, "Great." And I thought maybe that it was 10 minutes away. Turns out it was 3 hours away. And turns out half the students in the class were all from that same town. And just about every weekend after that first week, I spent in this town 2 hours south of where I was studying, and I had this whole group of friends. And I never would have met them if I wasn't in that class with them, right? So now again, back to the Study Abroad website, you also have many programs which are called affiliate programs, which are basically private companies in the US that kind of are designed by American professors for American students abroad. And those can be a good option for some students, but oftentimes basically they'll take you and put you in class with other American students, whereas if you challenge yourself in a direct exchange program, the immersion opportunity is really being an extraordinary experience to develop a new perspective and to develop your language proficiency.
So I will let everybody here know that I actually didn't study abroad, but I'll explain where we're getting to. I grew up really low income, and so the only people I knew who had ever been abroad were my father and my uncle. My father had been on an aircraft carrier just outside of Japan, and my uncle had been in the first American involvement directly in the Gulf War. And so those were the only people I knew who had ever been abroad. And the idea that you could go abroad seemed very impossible, particularly when I was in school on Pell Grant or on work study. And so I didn't even really attempt to go abroad in the traditional sense of study abroad. And so for people who are thinking about advising your students, I was thinking about this text message that I got the other day from a student who told me, "I know you spent a lot of time abroad, I just didn't realize I haven't ever asked you how you did it, because for me, I think this is going to be over as soon as I graduate." And that's heartbreaking to me, is that many of us don't know the opportunities that are before us. So one of the first times I, quote, went abroad was actually in the basement apartment of a little tiny flat in Missoula, Montana, with a large group of Saudi students while we were fasting for Ramadan, having conversations and everything else. And then I put myself out there for national scholarships like the Fulbright, and I'm very, very grateful for the Fulbright program, and I would encourage everybody here to apply, because the only people who can count you out are you if you don't apply. Otherwise, when you put yourself out there, you can open up lots and lots of opportunities for exploration abroad, for discovery. So I went to Bahrain the first time. I had an opportunity to spend any length of time abroad. And when I was in Bahrain, my whole family was like, "Well, we've heard of it because that's where your uncle was." So that was nice. But after that, I kind of got hooked, and I thought, how else am I going to do this? And so I want to point you to a resource on campus that is incredible for you, which is the Office of National Scholarship Advisement, Dr. Vivian Ibrahim and Dr. Whitney Woods. I would encourage you, even if you're just thinking like, maybe it's not a Fulbright, maybe I'm not that person who could go do that for a year. There are other opportunities. If you're Pell receiving, there's the Gilman, and the folks at the Study Abroad office are incredible, and they're advising to that, as well as the Critical Language Scholarship. I was also fortunate that after I was able to go on my Fulbright, I applied for a Mitchell Scholarship, which took me to Northern Ireland. And so in Northern Ireland, I had the chance to be immersed in the community, doing research in applied peace and conflict studies. And then I started saying yes to every opportunity that presented itself, which led me to Yemen, much to my mother's dismay. I spent several months in Yemen, pulling kind of a Chandler Bing. And then from there, I went to Qatar, and I spent 3.5 years living in Qatar, working. First I studied, then I had an opportunity to continue my work. And every chance I got, I said yes to those opportunities, which is in fact how I got here to Mississippi. And so I would encourage all of you to look at national scholarships, because if you're thinking right now, well, I'm already a senior, or I'm already at the end and this just doesn't seem possible. In fact, it is, and a lot of people will pay you to go abroad and to have those opportunities and possibilities for discovery and exploration. And so I would encourage you to reach out to Dr. Vivian Ibrahim and Dr. Whitney Woods at the Office of National Scholarship Advisement.
Awesome, thank you for those resources. I heard a couple of people talk about the importance of language, learning a second language, being immersed in a second language. And yet, not all students are either able to do that. They don't have the coursework, they're not required to take the coursework. And even, to speak to something that Jason, you said early on, was part of the reason you want to do this is to provide students who are like you, who didn't have the opportunities, sort of expose them, right? So on the one hand, I can see the argument for, you must have second language and that's the real purpose. And on the other hand, another purpose of study abroad simply is to expose students who otherwise have never thought about this, just so that they go, oh, wow, there's a whole other world out there. Maybe they come on board to a second language, maybe they don't. But to anybody that sort of feels like this is an area they want to speak to, what is the role of sort of second language? How important is that? Like, to what extent ought we be pushing ourselves or our students toward, using study abroad for specifically the development of second language proficiency?
First, I think maybe I'll taking your first, I want to go back a little bit, tie this to the competitive advantage. Competitive advantage, taking the word competition in a positive spin. There is a positive competition. When it's negative, it's jealousy. Competitive advantage means what makes you different. What advantage do you have that to the audience, the hiring audience, that you can think, you can make them convince them to say you should hire me because I bring this to you, which you call value. But in this global environment, where there is no business on earth, including the little stores, that is not impacted by the global environment. Everything they sell was made somewhere. Everything you touch is either going somewhere or coming from somewhere else. And that international global environment, it is amazing to be able to tell the interviewer or your landscape, your job landscape, I have something that I can offer because I have a global insight to this because, and of course your study abroad just makes it human. Like I'm telling you, before your parents were ever married, I went to high school and I just told you the story. But I know that gave me the privilege to go and have an amazing breakthrough in global business negotiations because I understood how to talk to them. Because I had that insight from my third high school experience or international. So that makes you, I got my first job, and I'll really make this very smart. I was hired by the chairman and CEO of Bayer AG. Chairman, president, and CEO at a conference. We were discussing multinational corporation. I was one of 25 students. I was engaged. He asked me to sit in the lunch, and I explained to him. And actually, later I found out he told his personnel officer, I'm going to make sure you don't give her an office that she turns down. And you remember, not a little African girl and a German CEO. Why? Because he later told me I was able to talk in terms of global things. Because he said, I still remember, Americans come to our country and they try to run their companies by translator. That was his. And so going to this competitive advantage is a positive, is serious. Emotional intelligence is about international cultural interest. It's self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and social management. You understand yourself enough to share it respectfully, be aware of the others, and respectfully be receptive to create that environment, which instead of the how to fix this and that. And so I sincerely believe language is an incredible thing, because today you can, all of these companies, you say, I can speak this country, this position open somewhere, oh, I can do it. I have this insight, I have this experience, I've traveled to that country. That's your ticket to get the job in totally success. I believe you can communicate with the global human.
And in terms of kind of developing your language proficiency abroad, I know I said one way to do that, of course, is to sit in a class with local students. Just one of many ways to develop a social network, which builds your relationships in another language, right? But a couple other things that you can do, for example, is somebody said, find something abroad that is your passion at home or comfortable to you at home. So kind of find a club that you're involved in here in the U.S., find that abroad, right? So for me, going abroad, my sport growing up was ice hockey. I'm from Northeast, and obviously I wasn't going to find that in Argentina, but I found something similar, roller hockey club, and this team invited me in, and then we ended up traveling all over the country playing, and it was just, for me, a way to develop the social network and use the language all the time. Another way to kind of grow your social network abroad is a homestay option, right? So a lot of the study abroad programs that we offer here at the University of Mississippi will allow you to live with a local family, which means oftentimes 3 meals a day where you have to use your language as a real tool to communicate, right? So again, it brings language to life, and it makes it much more exciting than even the best professor in a language class, right?
So we've talked a lot about advantages for students, and we'll keep talking about those, but also there's advantages for faculty, for administrators, for people like me, for instance. And so maybe speak to, and there are a couple of people who teach classes regularly and take students. What have you gained? How have you become a better educator, a better researcher, a better administrator through being involved in study abroad?
I think for me, it's all the problem solving that I've had to do in so many different countries at this point. I've been to, well, I'm not going to list them all, I've been to a lot of different places. Each a little bit culturally different, each running anywhere from 37 has been the smallest to 102 has been the largest program that I've been on. So coordinating college students with locals and everything else. Negotiating all that was pretty good training for when I got to where I was actually doing that as a chair, trying to herd faculty and students through the program. Because it's, if you can get 100 students up at 4 a.m. and successfully onto a flight out of Heathrow by 7 a.m. and deal with the hotel staff who has got completely different instructions from how checkout's supposed to be, as the agency told you the night before. Getting everybody together on Friday for me is easy compared to that. So I think doing that was a great way to get some admin chops in some very strange situations. And also, I'm not sure people that know me would guess this, but I am a dyed-in-the-wool introvert, and opening my mouth to talk to strangers and ask for things is exceedingly difficult for me to do. And doing this trip a couple of years in a row, by the second year that was broken. It's like, if you want something to happen, you got to open your mouth and just if you don't do it naturally, just watch what other people do and copy them, because you can figure out how to be an extrovert for a couple of hours. So it also helped develop that into my personality. It was huge, I think. I don't think I would be, to what extent I'm good in my current role, I don't think I would be nearly as successful at it had I not had these experiences in running these trips previously.
Yeah, I think I didn't take students abroad until right before COVID, so I haven't been doing it all that long. But the class that I take abroad is very much connected to the class I teach here, most commonly in the political science department since 2017. And I can say with complete certainty that taking students on this study abroad trip has made me a better teacher in the traditional delivery classroom when I'm back in Mississippi. And I think that's for two reasons. One is because it's reinvigorated. This is a new class really for me, starting a few years ago. And being able to teach it and bring it to the curriculum, bring it to the students, has reinvigorated the teaching that I do inside the undergraduate curriculum in political science. The biggest thing is I'm also learning. I'm on this trip with the students at the United Nations, and I'm listening to the people who are practicing international relations for a living talk about the things that I teach. And I would almost be malpractice not to bring that back and use it to shape my syllabus and use it to shape the way that I think about the material that I cover and how I cover it. So it's definitely made me a better teacher, in part because I'm really learning a lot on these trips and bringing it back, I think, to the benefit of the students taking classes.
So turning a little bit to kind of back to the keynote that we heard this morning about the global landscape we find ourselves in now, increasing toxic polarization in most democracies, particularly among political partisans. Countries are reporting record levels of affective polarization, both in politics and beyond. So the first question really, and this kind of goes to, Lauren, what I heard you say a little bit at the beginning, so maybe we start with you, in terms of finding similarities and the importance of, even within differences, we can reimagine how we are similar and use those similarities to bolster relationships and encourage us to be able to have the kinds of conversations that don't start with us flaming each other on Facebook, for instance. So how have you experienced the division impacting democracies across the globe, classroom dynamics, relationships, abilities to get work done? And then as people think about responding to this as well, whether it's in the educational context or in the business context, is this true? In other words, are we polarized, or are we just kidding ourselves because the media tells us we're polarized? And whether or not we are or aren't polarized, what experiences to study abroad kind of help us reimagine those polarizations?
Yeah, that's a totally great point. Going back to what I was saying earlier about finding these similarities or things that really bring us together in different cultures. These are things I would have never known the nuances of the culture of Jordan or Morocco if I had never traveled there. I was also in the Croft Institute. I studied Middle Eastern politics and culture for 4 years. And so of course you read these things, but you can't really truly get a grasp on what is it like there in finding the ability to find those similarities that everyone was really family oriented. Everything is at a really slow pace. You tell your language partner, you want to meet after lunch? And they said, okay. I said, what time? She says, after lunch. Okay, like 2 p.m.? Whenever we finish eating lunch. And then that turned into actually at like 4:45 p.m. But I would have never realized that until I went to experience it. And to speak on polarization, I mean, yes, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, when I said Jordan is like the Mississippi of the Middle East, most people's reaction is, I couldn't think of two places that were so much more different. And I think the ability to spend time abroad and spend time, even if you aren't able to go abroad, but to spend time with people who are from different cultures here in Mississippi, I think it's actually a very diverse place. Here at the University of Mississippi, we have people from all countries of the world here. You can find them here at the University of Mississippi. So spending time talking with these people, getting their perspectives, or the ability to study abroad and live in that moment in yourself, I think can really help you bridge those gaps and find the similarities that you would have never realized. And I think it makes conversations about polarization easier. You understand this person has a very different opinion than me, and I don't agree with them. But now I have the foresight, I understand why they would even begin to think that way in the first place. And it's probably something that you would have never imagined if you weren't able to put yourself in their shoes.
Quickly to add to that point, I joked with my students when we were coming back from Jerusalem in the spring that perhaps we should just take all of Congress to the Elvis Presley Diner that sits in a gas station just outside of Jerusalem, because students who could not even stand each other in the classroom here in Mississippi, right, from January through to about spring break, we're suddenly having a very great time reenacting many of his songs in front of his statue at the diner. And that kind of brought the whole trip together, right? And then thereafter, the final 7 weeks in class, it was a much more cohesive dynamic, a much more cooperative dialogue, I would say, as we discussed very tough issues and forced each other to have conversations about things perhaps that we would not have had if you could just kind of retreat to the back of the classroom. So that's been my experience, at least, in that I have noticed that it has been difficult for people to engage in conversation. And the topics that I teach can be quite controversial, but for some reason the Elvis Presley Diner seems to work. And that sounds like kind of flip, but I truly mean it. I would never have guessed that just conceding the point and taking them there would have been a great bonding moment for people.
So in the literature, you find this term exhausted majority, which describes somewhere between 2/3 and 80% of the American population, similar proportions of other countries where this kind of research has been done. And because of dialogue work, what I call bridge building work can be seen as inherently political. Many college students say they're uninterested in politics. What's your best advice on how to get students more interested in having the kinds of difficult conversations that can enable us to work together across our divisions? How do we get students interested in engaging when they otherwise might not want to engage?
Yeah, I mean, earlier I talked about how the things I kind of stress are asking students to really observe people. To watch what the locals are doing and to talk to them and to see what this is all going on. And to me, a big step is thinking about it from the perspective of doing that with a purpose can make a big difference, right? We observe, we see, but to purposefully observe means to do something that I think is very important in this context, which is we're trying to find the human in everything, right? We're trying to see these people at their positions and the things that are going on in their lives as not separate from what happens in my circle, but in fact a part of everything that happens. And I think if we can start to tweak the way we think about these things, to think about meaningful observation and finding the human in everything, it does go a long way towards breaking down sort of that natural tendency to shy away from things that we call political.
I think too, when you get out of here and somewhere else, I think it in some ways takes a little bit of the heat off these discussions. My students, when we were in Spain this last summer, conservatives took back a large portion of various state and countrywide governments, and they were kind of asking, like, are conservatives here, they're different than the ones back in the United States. So I was like, well, you know, to some extent, but then, you know, there's some things going on in the States have also been going on in Europe, and students who I kind of knew from side conversations sort of knew where they landed politically, but some of the emotion behind that content, I think because of where we were, was diffused for a bit, and we were just kind of talking about these things more as just kind of sociological phenomenon, why people group the way they do, and having more open conversations. I think every trip I've done, there has been a curiosity there that hit. When we were in Northern Ireland on the first trip I did for Ole Miss, I ended up changing my entire lectures that week because they started asking about the murals and the troubles, and then got real into that. I kind of underestimated my own students and didn't figure that they would be very, besides a brief superficial telling, that they really wanted to dig into it, how these political parties changed, and why doesn't Parliament meet up here to do anything, those kind of things. So there is more curiosity there than I think, and I also think pulling folks out of here kind of turns down the heat around opinions a little bit, and you can really maybe take advantage of that and enter into some of these discussions using maybe just as a start comparing where you are with back home and similarities and differences and get the conversation going. But I found that's a kind of regular thing that comes up, by the second, third week that we're over there.
This bridge building role, if not task, is a very much fit task and role for a professor or a teacher in a classroom, because you have young people in front of you, impressionistic young people, who have questions, who have curiosities, who have fears and anxieties. And I think my study abroad, as I mentioned to you at an early age, has kind of made me aware and sensitive to this kind of reality. So I can look at my students like I honestly look at them. They can be in the entire auditorium, but I can see each one. But with that kind of sensitivity, not to be judgmental, but to make sure they're okay, to make sure they're engaged. And I teach at a university where we have a lot of international students, a lot. And when I come in, I prayerfully ask, genuinely prayerfully counter every day to my class that no one leaves my class without being impacted somehow, a little bit, the best way I know how. I know in that international kind of conversation we're having, that's really what my legacy is to me. That's what I see myself. I have done all this corporate work, 4 continents, but I was really born to be a teacher in this environment. I was just kind of packing up my toolkit. I walk in and I see people, I see them, and they ask me sometimes, Professor, why do you care so much? And I tell them, because I started very early young as an intern, I see in each of you in front of me, I see me. I see me, that little kid. And when you approach them, they listen. So when you put, instead of I see my role as a teacher, a preacher, I see myself like as a mentor. And I really want students to be able 10 years later to say, I am here or I did that because of what she said. And that's only by my life experience. So I see them. So there were some students, Asian mostly, and this is the similarity is good, but I'm just gonna, how do you call it, I just want to just make sure when you use similarity, it's very necessary, but not to always look for people who are similar to you. Because they sit to people who they rank up, everybody comes like in a bunch of their own country culture. And so I individually group them and say, your parents or somebody paid airline ticket for you to cross the ocean so you can talk the same language, you can eat the same food. Why did you come here? And the first they would really like as a curiosity and stuff, them were nervous, but I kind of share with them about my experience. And then to see some students, I'm going to give you, because you're young, this real life example. 2 young, 1 young man, very young, very small, sit in the front, and they're not even sure if their English is clear. They'll go, can you please repeat, Professor? And they ask me, they want to really be leaders. And I ask them, they're not going to be leaders in the world by speaking in Chinese. And I said, how can we do this? I said, tell all your Chinese friends you don't want to speak in English. And later, to make a long story short, they had a debate club that they started at the school. And one of the students is teaching graduates now, teaching English speech writing to Chinese executives. And I asked him before they graduated, one of them got the leadership, how did you do that? And he said, I listened to you that first day and we told everybody, no Chinese speaking in my environment. And literally they did that. So what I'm trying to explain to you is, yes, it's important, similarity to make you comfortable. But that is the challenge we have in the world around kids, because we are too much connected with the people who are similar with us, think like us. We just don't want discomfort. And until you are willing to push that border and to try it, you'll be okay. You have to believe that you're going to be okay. But go beyond that, then that kind of world that we discussed, your future will still be a close one. That would be. So professors, teachers at every level have that incredible role of bridge building. Because when you trust us, you listen to us. I know. And that's really the biggest task for any teacher anywhere, to have your students say, he cares about me, she cares about me. If you walk in with the academic thing, just kind of lecturing, that word, then the students kind of like, they're only thinking about grades. No, we have a role to really do bridge building, and I genuinely feel that's my legacy, kind of, my legacy.
So I'll push back on myself in that question. You know, so many college students say they're uninterested in politics. I think that's more of a reaction of they see the political environment in which they are, and they don't want Washington, for instance, right? They don't want that kind of politics. They don't want the polarization. And my graduate students have been talking about this interesting contradiction where students claim to be uninterested or little interested in politics, but quite interested in issues-based advocacy, right? Advocating for specific injustices that they might see. Gen Z is more likely than their older counterparts, for instance, to pull their support for a brand, a product, or a company based on a perceived support that company or organization has towards some injustice that they see existing. They're also more likely to be brand loyal to organizations that express views that align with their opinions. And maybe this is a little bit what you were speaking to, Dr. Williams, with respect to students coming, you know, in the college classroom here, disagreeing, singing songs of Elvis, very similar to Jason, what I heard you say, is pulling them out of their American context and taking them somewhere else and open them up to some of these more difficult conversations, right? So the question here is, you know, do you see a similar passion in students that you take on study abroad trips, this desire to advocate for issues? And if so, have you found them to be both able to express why they're so passionate and willing to engage with others who are equally but oppositely passionate, but just about either polar opposite or about some other issue that they find unimportant? In other words, do you see study abroad encouraging advocacy and or encouraging the ability to see across advocacy toward dialogue across differences, even if I might leave that dialogue and go advocate or go protest or whatever, I might do both of those things. And so an equal appreciation for advocacy and dialogue in the context of fighting for the issues or the people or the injustices that we might see. And any reflections there?
I haven't necessarily noticed that students come back, passionately, strongly in favor of one side or another of the conflict, but I've noticed kind of what Dr. Nordstrom said in his own personal experience, that definitely they're more curious and they want to read more and find out more about issues, and not just domestic issues, but international issues. One example is we sent a lot of students to the Basque Country, northern Spain, Bilbao, and when they come back, they're all fascinated with kind of the complicated history that the Basque Country has with the federal government in Spain. And they all want to research that. They all want to develop that into a topic for their senior thesis in one way or another. And before they left, many of them weren't even aware that this conflict existed. So for me, that's what I see, is that they're curious, they want to read more, they want to find out more. And going back to the Spain example, another thing that happens to you when you go there, I think here in the US, generally, you mentioned that kind of a lot of people, we don't often engage in the social environment about difficult issues. Generally, when you go to Spain, it's very difficult to avoid political issues. Basically, a friendly lunch, a friendly dinner, a beer with family. Politics is always at the very top of everyone's agenda. And I know, for me personally, before I started traveling, I didn't have a perspective on a lot of international issues. I had to develop an international perspective because otherwise I had nothing to talk about. Because that was the conversation, right?
Thinking specifically about the kinds of things I know my students are exposed to through the academic side of the study abroad, they become aware, I think, that there are folks out there in the world who are advocating specifically about things like nuclear disarmament. It's a pretty daunting thing to go abroad for 2 weeks and come back and develop an advocacy position. I think it's a natural first step, right? It's getting the awareness of the issue and getting the information that a student might need if that's particularly what they wanted to be advocates for. But it is interesting to me, part of the reason why I've been sitting here contemplating is thinking back to all the trips I've taken abroad with students. And in these European countries, there are lots of demonstrations. There are lots of public displays of advocacy going on while we're there. And so it's possible, I guess, for that to be observed and to be internalized and to realize that there are, at least in those two geographical spaces, opportunities to really publicly and vociferously support issues that you feel strongly about.
But I think, unfortunately, in this world where we live, there is so much negativity. It's not about the topic. It's about what group you belong to and which you support. And I think, like I said earlier, and I sincerely believe this, the academia can lead this if the world is going to be healed. And it is your future. Most of us have our life in the you have to be engaged and really understand these differences before you take corners. And I think earlier somebody said you have to listen. If we listen, we will learn. If we listen, there could be a dialogue. But you have to embrace that a good, a positively healthy global environment is possible. But until you are convinced and try to fight for it and make it your vision of your world, that discourse, that discussion, even if you try, it is still going to end up not a conversation, but a verbal fight, and more discourse, more negativity, more dislike. Next time they're not sitting next to you because you just said something they don't want to hear. I think the academia, teachers, platforms like Cain will be presenting, especially you young people, it's your life, it's your future. You have to own it, and you have to make a decision. There's got to be a better way that my grandma used to talk about. Especially in America, as a person who came young as a teenager, our country is changing. You can change it back and better. And I think this kind of discussion, until you'll be willing to listen and have a conversation, not an argument. Not like hateful because they said something before they wore something. Until that changes. Like in this discussion, we're talking about Spain, about Europe. And then there are 4 countries that are running the world economically: Brazil, Russia, India, China, BRICS. And until we realize, look at it, where's the United States? Where's Great Britain? Where's France? Where's Spain? It's BRIC. And China and India only like almost half of 50% of the population in the world. Your generation can lead the rest of us. I think the kind of question you ask is, the kind of platform this provides. Study abroad, not just to visit, not to just learn cultures, not to taste food, not to come back and tell your family which one you like, which one you didn't like, but to really have an objective, a mission that we want to be the generation that can change this. And you can, and I think that's the kind of dialogue.
So, audience, thank you so much for being with us. We've been here for 90 minutes, and we have now plenty of time for your questions or comments. So we invite those questions and comments from you. What questions, what comments, what observations do you